Welcome to our podcast, How Would You Beat? In each episode, we pick a company and talk about how you could use jobs to be done innovation methods to beat that company's product. We'll discuss innovation theory and explain the methods so you can put the theory into practice at your company. I'm Jay Haynes, the founder and CEO of Thrive. That's Thrive without the vowels, thrv.com. We help product marketing and sales teams use jobs to be done innovation methods to build, market, and sell great products. I'm here with my colleague, Jared Ranieri.
So today we've got a special guest, Matt Bjornson. We haven't done too many of these with guests, but he is a great person to have here on How Would You Beat using JTBD. Today we'll look at how would you beat retailers. And Matt in particular has a background in retail and both jobs to be done. He's a retail and jobs to be done expert, which is kind of rare. He was the director of product management at Target from 2016 to 2020. He was responsible for turning around the Registry group at Target. And for those of you who don't know, you're probably familiar with Target, the company, but it's done extremely well. It has $22 billion in revenue, which is up 21% in the past year, which people might not have predicted going into COVID. Its market cap is approaching $100 billion, and it's up 65% in the past year. So clearly the market thinks Target is doing something right. And Matt has direct experience with jobs to be done. And he can talk to why is it useful for retailers? Why should retailers be using jobs to be done innovation methods? And how can retailers use jobs to be done to beat their competitors? Because certainly a company like Target has no shortage of competitors in the retail industry. So Matt, it's great to hear your story. It's great to have you here. You know, we really enjoyed working with you, and having a jobs to be done expert like yourself here on our podcast today is exciting. So we're excited to hear your story. Welcome.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Jared. Excited to be here. So I'll just give you a little bit of a background on our jobs experience at Target. So have long been interested in jobs to be done theory. I've been in high tech products for a long time. So, you know, getting to know the writings of Clay Christensen and who put forth the jobs theory was always something I wanted to do. And so when I became product director at Target over the Registry experience, you know, we had our jobs cut out to us, no pun intended. You know, it even though Target is one of the companies that most often people think about when, you know, they're getting married or having a baby, and they need all those things to kind of support their new stage in life. The business overall had kind of fallen on some pretty tough times. And what was really interesting from my perspective about the opportunity when you know, I met with my leader as part of the process was, here is something that unlike any other part of Target's business, it crossed not only the digital channels, but also the store and team member channels. So having surfaces in the store that the guests, the expecting mothers or the couples would actually interact with our team members as well as digitally. So that was a huge area of interest for me. And that in my time as product leader over Registry, we saw massive shifts that were happening. So when I joined, about 80% of revenue was coming from the stores and 20% digitally. You know, fast forward 3 years, that had drastically shifted to 60% digitally and 40% in stores. So you've seen like all these behavior changes. with our guests as a result of kind of, just overall changes in e-commerce and retail. Obviously, Target is doing very well as a result of COVID, which no one would see. But like I said, the Target Registry had been at a really tough point. They had really no growth, for a long period of time. And so when I talked to my leader, he was pretty candid about, what this opportunity was about. And it's really around like, we need to grow the business again. And so,
yeah, it's interesting too, that looking at, kind of the growth problem you're trying to solve with Jobs to be Done, that those particular jobs around registry, wedding, an incredibly important relationship, if not the most important relationship in anybody's life, of course, and children, having new children, et cetera. Those are both extremely functional and extremely emotional. We always say we like to map out kind of the dimensions of function and emotion, and everything contains emotion. But in some cases like that, you're talking about people with very, very heightened emotions because you're dealing with, your life partner and your children. So it's interesting, if that played into some of your thinking around it.
I would say, like, fast forward, once you and Jared came out and we did the sprint with you, I would say, one, the emotional, but also the social jobs were also super interesting as well. Because there's also this dynamic around expecting mothers want to appear like, hey, I've got the confidence to, take care of my child, and, very, obviously a baby is something that you got to keep alive and you got to continue to grow and nourish. And so that was a huge opportunity that we saw with jobs that previously we would surface some of that as part of some of the research activities that we were doing. But some of the key benefits around jobs was really like that, some mental models and some consistent language to think about that we could, so like, as you and Jared brought us through the sprint, like that language became part of, not just product and not just designs language, but, my counterpart in engineering, they were also using that language around, hiring and firing, and making progress, and thinking about innovation in the context of speed and accuracy. Those are just like huge wins for us as a team as we were trying to actually roll this out and implement this. I would say the other part of that is really making a shift from kind of away from how the current business and the previous product leaders had thought about the registry as a business. And it's very different from kind of traditional e-commerce where, hey, I'm going to target.com or some other retailer and I'm making a purchase. If someone in my family is having a baby, like you could empathize, like what do they really need to kind of help them be a good mother, or help baby get to sleep at night. That context around those jobs are very different from like, hey, I got to bring a present to a wedding shower. I mean, those are two completely different ways to think about the same business. And as we kind of shifted our thinking around that was really kind of a pivotal thing for that, reinforced like how we organized the teams, how we thought about our quarterly OKR planning, and how are we thinking about some of our key metrics as far as how are we measuring progress versus maybe some lagging indicators like the traditional e-commerce type metrics. But it was a huge thing, and it was obviously a multi-year effort, but going from no growth to in year 3 we grew the business by 25% top line. So
yeah,
that's amazing story. Since this is how would you beat? I'm curious about the competitive situation you were in with the registry. Like, who were your competitors? How did you think about taking share from them before jobs to be done? And then how did you think about it after jobs to be done? Were there any shifts in how you approached your competition?
It's really interesting, Jared. I would say pre-jobs, I mean, there's this, the whole concept of a feature factory. So, competitor XYZ releases this feature, and there's this mad frenzy, like, why don't we have that? Stakeholders like, why don't we have that feature, and what have you. And as part of the shift towards jobs, we really kind of reinforced the jobs that we were trying to solve. So prepare to bring baby home, away from, hey, I'm building a registry. As you think more about that, I mean, the team thought of some really interesting things that no one in the registry space was really thinking about. So it really kind of opened our way of approaching our business, even though, quote unquote, we're the registry team and there was these certain life moments that we were focused on, which I would say in retail is a huge opportunity. But it was more so about focusing on, hey, here's are the jobs that we're going after. And baby is in retail, for Target, Amazon, Walmart, that's a very critical demographic or segment that retailers want to win, because there's a lot of future habits change. They try new retailers because they're looking for ease of getting what I need, and how do I make that faster and better. And so there's a lot of Target had a lot of research as well to say, hey, there's a lot happening around shifting retailer loyalty, but really didn't. And so they had lots of data around that, but didn't really have like the shift in mental models around, well, what would cause them to change. And so, yeah, I'd say, Jared, it was a huge shift in terms of, well, okay, competitor XYZ, they're doing this, to focusing on the job. It really provided teams with a lot of focus, and a lot of, I don't know, kind of like shared language to use with stakeholders and even the guests. I mean, because ultimately we wanted to bring the guest language back into those jobs, so that as we look at the job steps and how well we're doing them, we can kind of objectively use their language to frame how the teams were thinking about and approaching opportunities.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, Matt. We always say this too, that one of the benefits of Jobs to be Done is, first and foremost, empathizing with your customer. And of course, in your case, you're getting married, you're having kids. Those are just like moments to really empathize with their struggle, not just, hey, here's a message to use, you should buy these, but really, what are they going through as their struggles? And the other is also to align your teams. So it's great to hear some of the internal perspective that it helped you reorganize your teams and focus on OKRs. And we see this more and more, that companies set out these OKRs. And then how do those OKRs have anything to do with your customer struggle, right?
Yes.
The OKRs and all the internal stuff is focused on the company's success, not necessarily your customer's success. And if you can bridge those gaps, really make the OKRs come together with what your customers are struggling. Just hearing your story, that makes us just, we love this stuff. So that's really exciting. And it's interesting also, from a retailer standpoint, and just, with the theme of how you would beat retailers, we always think of this moment, kind of registry and specifically, new baby which sometimes go together, obviously, that those are the moments, if you were to map out all the jobs to be done that a human goes through, you'd start with when they're born all the way until they die.
Yep.
And in there, you've got, your personal life and all the jobs that you're going to need to get done when you're a baby until, your funeral. And then you're going to need all those business jobs because you're going to have,
Yep.
a professional and work life. And then along the way, you have medical jobs.
Yep.
So it's interesting that this really is like the starting point for the journey. So in an interesting way, retailers have this huge opportunity. And I know obviously they all think about like, hey, we've got a baby that's a new customer. Let's like, how can we, get that customer to be a customer for life? Banks think this way as well. Like if you're in college, they're going to send you a ton of credit cards because if you set up your account with them, you're unlikely to switch your credit card, right? Same kind of
Oh,
idea.
yeah.
But they usually are focused, on their products. What can we sell for this
Yeah.
person?
Yes.
Maybe, or what financial products can we sell to this person because they have a bank account? And the better way to do it is obviously, and it's great to hear that this would lead to your success at Target because, thinking this way from your customer's perspective ultimately does lead to that kind of growth. And 25% growth. I mean, most companies would kill for that. That is like a game changer in growth rates. It changes your equity value, changes your market cap, changes your, multiple, whether you're public or private, everything changes with the increasing growth rate. Warren Buffett's famous for saying growth and value are tied at the hip, and it's
Yep.
totally true. So that's really, it's an impressive story. It really is.
Yeah.
Well,
You mentioned, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned leading versus lagging metrics. I'd love to hear you talk about that a little bit. Like, what metrics were you tracking that you would consider lagging metrics? And what were the new metrics that you started to look at that you felt were leading indicators of was something going to be successful or not?
Yeah. So, I mean, this could be a conversation in and of itself, but so I mean, in general, like retailers, like anyone else, they're looking at the ultimate lagging metric, our sales, right? So I'm looking at like how much was purchased off Registry on a weekly basis, and there's the categories that they purchased off of, and you can kind of like do a pivot table there with like Registry type and categories, etc. And that's kind of typical how retail thinks about those things. But if you look at something that we talked about during the sprint with you both was really around like, you've got the job executor and you got the benefactor, and so we've got, and Registry is kind of like a poster child because it's closer to eBay than it is like going to target.com and purchasing anything. So we've got the executor or executor of the job, and that's the gift giver. And they're the ones who are like, I'm friends and family, I'm going, Jared, I'm going to, you're having a baby, and so I'm going to your shower, or I'm helping you out, with whatever, helping baby get to sleep at night or what have you. But you're the benefactor, and so like they have different functional, social, and kind of emotional aspects of those jobs. And for us, it really started to say like, okay, as a benefactor, like, okay, yes, you want to get things, but how are you measuring progress? And so we would actually say, okay, we've got active number of registries. Okay, well then how do we suss that out to say, okay, we've got net new registries, and then you're past your due date. Maybe there's some kind of long tail effect where your due date, you're going to still purchase off your registry for the things that you didn't need after that. But we started looking at teasing apart some of those metrics were on the benefactor side, and then you can go over on the executor side of things and say, okay, like how often are they coming to the site to look at things? What are those kind of key categories that they're looking at? How do you think about like pairing the perfect gift? So it's not just diapers, but it's also the butt cream and the and the wipes, and it's everything else, or getting to sleep at night. If we were focused on that job, like hey, there's maybe I don't know what they're called, like the wrap things, the swaddle things, and maybe there's like paired up with maybe a first couple books for baby, and so you start to think about like how are those additional things that you can kind of get them to, whether through personalization or through just curation. Think about some of those things that are you're trying to identify where they're at with those jobs. And so rather than just sales, how do you break apart those numbers? And I feel we kind of dipped our toe in the water that I think there's a lot more of metrics that we could look at to identify other jobs other than preparing to bring baby home. We could look at other jobs like help baby get to sleep at night, to say how do we know like where these things are lined up, and these are all the jobs that you need to do for bringing a baby home, but I feel we just scratched the surface. So we had some of the basic life cycle type metrics, but we really tried to start to tease those apart into, especially when you look at like new opportunities, like planning a perfect gift or something like that, like what would those metrics look like? And so we started to piece those apart and tease those apart on a kind of we called them bets, or at the opportunity basis or feature basis that we were looking at.
Yeah, it's almost like instead of measuring how much time, like trying to hit this goal of people spending a long time with the registry product, with the gift givers, you actually want to figure out how can you decrease how long it takes them to put together the perfect gift.
Yes.
So that's kind of interesting, right? And then you can use the gift receiver's reaction to that as a metric for, was the gift good or not? Mm-hmm. And then you could track their experience as a parent to find out if the registry actually succeeded in preparing them to have this baby. So it's a totally different set of metrics than what you would normally look at in a purchase funnel. And what I think is really interesting about that is that, e-commerce is like the halcyon moment of being able to measure user behavior, right? Because you can measure every single click and at the end, do they make a purchase or not? But that can often lead to these really local optimizations, right? Because you're like, well, we don't want to, if we don't know if it's going to succeed, we don't want to put that much expense, that many resources into building something different. Because what if it breaks the funnel? So let's just A/B test everything to death. And we'll know if our choices were good after we launch them. That is the definition of a lagging metric, right? You don't know if it's good until after you put it out there. And because you're trying to measure after you launch it, you want to decrease the cost of every launch, which leads you to these incredibly minute local optimizations that only can create growth if you have a ton of traffic to start with. So if you're a new retailer and you don't have the audience of somebody like Target, those local optimizations are going to get you nowhere. The question is, how do you get somebody to move from Amazon to go to your site in the first place, right? Your purchase funnel is not going to help you do that. So I just think it's fascinating to think about like how these metrics of getting the job done can change your point of view and everything about how you operate as a retailer in e-commerce and create these much bigger growth margins.
Yeah,
a little rant about that.
And I wanted to mention something too, because we're covering a lot of detail too, so people listening might be a little confused about how the pieces of the puzzle will come together. Because Matt's mentioning, the job beneficiary and the job executor, and those are really important customer identifications you need to make, right? But the other thing that I think is interesting about this is the gift giver and the gift receiver. And as Matt was mentioning, and Jared was just talking about, traditional e-commerce approach to that is going to look at these metrics and just see, what's going on with the gift giving and receiving. And since Matt mentioned it too, a good example there is, well, if you're a new parent and one of the jobs we know you definitely need to get done is to get a baby to sleep through the night. So we would take that job, and we looked at this with Target, and we said, okay, getting a baby to sleep tonight, if I'm going to hire Target, in the jobs to be done language, to help me get a baby to sleep tonight, how do I do it? And Matt, I remember when we first met with you guys, we walked around the store, and he walked around Target,
Yeah.
like, "Hey, how do I get a baby to sleep tonight?" Clearly, like an incredibly important job for parents. Jared and
Yep.
I both happen to also have twins. We both have twins, so we've
Oh my
if you
gosh.
have twins, getting a baby to sleep tonight is like it's even more
It's
important.
a life or death
Yeah,
situation.
it's a life or death. So, but you couldn't do it. You literally couldn't walk into the store and say, "Oh, here's the get a baby suit tonight." There were different product categories. There's swaddles, there's bottles, there's diapers, there's toys, pacifiers, and which I always find fascinating. There's literally a pacifier display, and if you give your baby a pacifier, they will absolutely not sleep through the night. So it's the anti getting a baby sleep tonight system. But if you're looking at it from a registry perspective, you're saying, okay, well, if I am going to put together a registry, one of the things I need to do is get a babysitter night. And that's where you can really help those gift receivers, the new parents say, okay, this is my goal. And then from the gift giver, if I could give a new parent the gift of getting your baby to sleep through night, that was probably the best gift you can give any parents. And it's funny, because we had twins, we had to use some method, and it worked really well with our kids. So every new parent, I couldn't do it through a registry because it didn't exist yet, but I would go to their house and I'd be like, okay, here's how we did it. And our 4 kids, every single one of them slept 12 hours every night after 90 days of being born. And no one believed it, right? Other parents were like, that can't happen, and it turns out you need a lot to make it happen. But because we had twins, we researched it. We were very motivated to figure out how to get this job done. But that is the way we break it down, is looking at from the perspective of the gift receiver. What's the job? I don't just need a swaddle blanket. Why do you need a swaddle blanket? Well, because I'm trying to get my baby to sleep tonight. And then from the giver, and Matt, you mentioned this, and Jared too. I think it's great to say, well, if you can get that job done as fast as possible for the person, going to the registry and creating the gifts they need, and for the gift giver, it's the optimal scenario. You don't have to spend a ton of time looking around trying to figure out which things should I give them. Do I give them this swaddle blanket? Do I give them these diapers? This bottle? It's going to help them get their job done. Yeah. So Matt, maybe, and sorry, Jared, did you have a question there?
No, just one thing that to point out. I just searched on Target.com, get a baby to sleep, and I got some product listings, like a couple swaddles and a sleep trainer. And then I got an ad for Ollie sleep supplements, delightful gummies for a good night's rest. I hope Target's not recommending you give those to a baby.
Drugs.
Oh boy. That must be an ad.
But it's just this is a great example of like even keyword searches are about getting jobs done or not, right? Like we always talk about how Google is the ultimate like find tools to get jobs done engine because search works so well. And the ads, even the ad server needs to be a part of this, right? That's a part of the customer experience. So when I, as a parent, go on Target and I search for get a baby to sleep and I see Ollie's, it really throws me.
Yes. Yeah.
I remember we did that same search on Amazon, when we were working with Matt, and the first result in Amazon, which is a good way to do your competitive analysis. So the first result in Amazon was "Go the F to Sleep," which is a pretty well-known book, but it clearly has nothing to do with helping you get your baby to sleep. Yeah. Well, great. Well, Matt, let me say just at the end here, maybe if there are 3 things that you could tell other, product managers, director of products, or product executives, anybody listening who might be thinking like, hey, jobs to be done, what are the 3 things that I need to know about jobs to be done? Either, how to do it, or why it's valuable, or how to overcome some obstacle. What are your kind of top 3 thoughts on jobs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, I would say one of the first things, every large organization, talks about how customer focused they are. I would say that jobs theory is really the best way to bring that to life. because it's not just talking about the metrics piece of it. It's not just the end result. You're really trying to tease apart the why that they're making. Why are they choosing Target? Why are they choosing Amazon or what have you? And that why is really the important aspect of that. Of course, we want sales and what have you. And until you get to that point, you can kind of come up with personas or whatever kind of fantasy tool sets that you want to use, but until you kind of bring to these and understand why people have fired you. So why did you fire Target Registry for this? And what were some of the causal mechanisms behind that? Until you start understanding that, you really don't understand your customer at all. The other part of it is, and we don't have time to do this, but is really kind of okay, who else am I really competing against? And so, it may be someone from, I'm not competing with Amazon or Walmart. Maybe it's something completely different that you don't know about. So, and I think that's where a lot of potential innovation can really come from. So I think the other part and around jobs is, as a product leader, you really need to understand that this is going to take time, and the investment is worth it. But you really need to prioritize, where should we go with this first? I was fortunate. I had a leader who supported my point of view, and that obviously meant a lot. But that allowed me and the team to kind of go out and pursue this opportunity. But it took us time. It was just bringing you and Jared in for a sprint was just the starting point, and the hard work and of really kind of fleshing those things out it comes over time. It takes time and investment, and it takes a lot of communication with it. Everyone in Target loves Registry. They love baby Registry. So whether it's marketing, merchandising, store ops with the team members, everyone was super passionate about it. And it also involves communicating with them, the shifts, and why we're trying to make this, make the shift. And so ultimately it's around growth and what have you. But I think the other part of it is, and I think this is probably maybe one of the challenges. I think the sweet spot is organizing teams around jobs, because if and not all, you can't go after everything, but those critical skills or critical jobs that are so important and vital for your business, you deserve to invest in those. If those are really priorities, you really need to just go deep on those. And so, at Target, there was another team. I think I introduced you to Andy Weisbecker, but he was over the flagship app. They had also organized at the same time Registry did, around jobs, because we both saw it's such a pivotal thing for us to not only prioritize development and engineering, but also where are we going to research? Where's the opportunities? So I know that's probably 3 or 5 things.
Yeah, that's great. No, and I think that's a great way to end, because that does take us back to Clay Christensen, who obviously helped spread jobs to be done thinking and jobs theory throughout the world. And he said specifically that, which in Competing Against Luck, which is a book we always recommend to everybody, that companies really need to organize around their customer's job, because they organize the company around what the company needs to do. Yes. And that can lead to disaster. I mean, of course, just Kodak, BlackBerry, Britannica, all the historical examples, they weren't organized around their customers, and now they're no longer companies. So that's really great to hear. I mean, we love to see this, because, a lot of times we can seem like we're talking about theory, but just Matt, to have your experience and expertise in really, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Totally.
And it's really great to see, product teams adopting this stuff and implementing it with such great successful results like you've had. And
Yeah.
that's great. Well, thanks so much for being here today. Hopefully, I think this was very enlightening. And certainly anybody who wants to follow up and learn more, we have a lot more resources they can learn about. So Matt, thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks for listening to our How Would You Beat podcast. Visit us at thrive.com, that's THRV.com, to get our free how-to guides and try our Jobs to Be Done software for free.